All right. Promeet, originally from India, got one of his four master's degrees with an MBA in marketing at a top business school in India. After working for an advertising agency in Bombay for 3 years, he then moved to the US to receive his MBA in finance from the James Madison University in Virginia. He then bounced around in a few different careers, and one of which helping Dell start their first sales center outside of the US, and then joining IBM where he led a procurement team in India. He then took an academic leave of absence in 2010 and then earned another degree from Eastern Mennonite University in Virginia. He then decided to move into academics full-time. He pursued his PhD in educational leadership from the Minnesota State University in Mankato with a keen interest in leadership, conflict resolution, ethics, community engagement, and he currently teaches business at the business department at St. Paul College in St. Paul, Minnesota. We've had a great opportunity getting to know Promeet over the last few weeks and months, and we're really excited to hear him and hear his story.
JC helped me so much when I was an international student at MSU Mankato. It's nice to see an entire row of people from MSU Mankato. I feel very much at home. Thanks, Sam and Garrett, for inviting me over. I didn't think that I needed to make slides after watching what Erin said, because one thing she said is, it's complicated. And if there's anything that sums it up well enough, it's that. Has anybody in this group, been to India? No? Okay. I think the jokes about traffic in India should sum it up. It's complicated, but somehow it works. Okay? And believe it or not, that's exactly what the H-1B system is here, or the student visa system. It is all very, very complicated. Somehow it works. So I've learned over the years, it's important to have a sense of humor. It's important to be patient. And it's very, very important to be comfortable with not knowing what's going on. Okay? So just like what Erin said, please stop me at any time. This was my role when I was employed by IBM in India. The position of global market intelligence, there was one person in the whole of the IBM community of 250,000 people. It was a competitive process, and they hired me. Okay, so I was very blessed, I was very privileged to be in this role. And it was after I had only 2 MBAs at that time, just 2. So in this role, I worked with IBM in Thailand, I worked with IBM in Vietnam. We wanted to start an office in Vietnam. And one of my colleagues said, we need some backup. Can you come over for a few months, get to know the team, and then start hiring talent locally? I said, sure. All I had to do was give IBM Travel Services my passport, and I got a work visa for, this was Vietnam. Later on, I had to do some work in Thailand. Same thing. Give them the passport. You get the work visa. It's over and done with. I thought, wow, this is going really well. I'm going to do the same with the US. And that's when things slow down a little bit, because it's not as easy as it might look. And all of us who've worked in academics and who've processed visas, we know this. It is really an interesting process, but it works. Okay? I worked here for almost 10 years at IBM before taking academic leave of absence. I think that the work visa is complicated, but it is worth it. Not only because it's good for the company, but it's actually good for all of us. And I won't get too much into this. I want to move on into something more interesting. But briefly, there's research that shows that international workers benefit not just the origin country, but not just the destination country, but the origin country as well. Okay? We live in a system. We live in a system where all of us are connected to each other. We're not independent, and the relationships that we develop benefit all of us. So I think that there's huge benefit in having people from different skills, different work environments, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it just gets a little bit tedious to do that, but we will get to that. Erin talked about the H-1B visa program. It's a great program. I'm on an H-1B visa right now. And I reached the end of my first 3-year installment, and I'm still waiting for my extension. Okay, I'm waiting for it right now. Fortunately, I can still work. Okay, what's interesting is, and I thought, what perspective can I offer to all of you? I think this event that we're having right now is so helpful. It is important to network. It's important to be empathetic. It's important to understand what people are going through. When I first started working at St. Paul College, I was offered this job, but I didn't have the work authorization. My work authorization was tied into the F1 visa that I had, which when I transferred over to OPT, that was why and how I was in the country. My license is tied to my OPT, my license is tied to my H-1B. It's a very complicated thing. When I moved from OPT to the H-1B, in the interim period, there was a time when I didn't have a license. So for 1 month, I was at home, right here in Mankato. I love Mankato for many reasons. This is one of them. My friends supported me a whole lot. Okay? I had a lot of local support. I had a lot of university support. My university colleagues were extremely helpful. They're very understanding. Okay? But it was kind of curious to think that after all the interesting things that I'd done, after the promise of what I could do, I was grounded for a month because I was waiting for something to get processed. And I don't think that this is, I'm not complaining. All I'm saying is it's complicated. And I think one of the important things for all of us to understand is that the dignity of labor is still very, very important, regardless of your authorization status. And my university community understood that very, very well. Once again, MSU Mankato, great place. In the workplace, I've seen that that sometimes did not happen. And without taking any names, there have been organizations that I've worked for. There have been HR, no departments either. There have been people that I've worked for who've just not understood that there are certain challenges which are just impossible for me to cover on my own. You know, so I think what I said before, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of understanding that, you know, some of us have a few challenges which are different from others, so try and understand the other person a little bit better. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer that. I'll take a quick pause. Anything at all that strikes a note, anything that you'd like to know more about?
What does it look like for the empathy that you mentioned? What does it look like in a company that's providing the empathy that you're talking about versus one?
Such a good question. Such a good question. So, for example, I have this on one of my slides later on, but it's so much easier to just talk through it. A lot of the employees that I hired here when I was working in the Washington, D.C. metro area in the year 2000, because they were waiting for their papers to come through, they could not leave the country. For any family circumstance, for any family emergency, they simply could not leave. So at least extend that kind of emotional support in whatever way. Every single person is different. You know, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So to at least understand that is very helpful. You know, I mean, I've known people who've experienced losses in their family, but they didn't go back simply because am I going to be allowed back into the US was the primary concern. You know, so it's, I mean, those, for me, the problem was I could not drive. You know, I lost my license for a month. That's nothing compared to not wanting to leave the country because you don't know if you can come back. Okay, so I think the challenge lies with all of us wanting to be at the workplace and having a level playing field. Sometimes it's not entirely possible because there might be something weighing on, I'll use myself as an example, something weighing on my mind that's preventing me from doing the best job that I possibly can. You know, thanks for that question, very good one. We've talked about that, the challenge. The other thing is not knowing when you can possibly start working. When I got the job at St. Paul College, they use something called premium processing. You pay a little bit extra and you get your H-1B visa application pushed to the front of the line. And it's almost $1,000 extra. $2,500. Oh, really? Wow. See, rules change all the time. So it is worth it, given the circumstances, but all of this adds to the cost of bringing somebody on board. You've got to ask yourself at the end of the day, it's not just a dollar amount, what are the tangible and the intangible benefits from hiring person A, B, or C? Okay, what else do I have? So much uncertainty. Yes, it is very, very important to find out how to do that. I think networking is very important. I was joking with Sam that I'm kind of a part-time attorney because over the time that I've spent here trying to understand the system, I've learned so many things that I'm actually, in medical terms, my eldest brother who's a doctor at the Mankato clinic, he said, you know, everybody self-medicates with Google. And that's exactly what I was doing for my own work situation. You know, not recommended in medicine or in immigration, but we have to do it. You know, we have to do it, and we rely on networks more than you can ever imagine. It's very, very important. This is so helpful. When I was a student, I wish I'd networked more. But to go back to what I said, there's so much stress. You're approaching a deadline. You know that you're going to graduate. You know that you might need a job. You might need somebody to come up with a sponsorship offer. Is that going to happen? Does that weigh you down? And does that prevent you from going to a networking event that could potentially help you a lot? You know, so that there's so many things that students have to make hard choices with. It's not always possible to connect all the dots. Yes?
Who is your point of contact? So the alternative to Googling.
Yeah.
Do you have your straight line of communication with someone in an HR department? Do you speak directly to an attorney? Who answers your questions and gives you information about the status of your visa or the transition of things?
Such a good question. So at the time that I finished my 4th master's degree in Virginia, I wasn't sure of what to do. And again, I thought, there's a lot at stake. I'd quit my job at IBM, and I thought the only thing I can do is to contact an attorney, which I did. It was helpful, but it didn't change anything because I already knew that I was going to do a doctoral degree. And a confession to the group, I did 1 master's degree just to stay on in the US. Okay? So, and I told that to my doctoral advisor. He said, oh, shame on you. He said, actually, that's a good thing, but the reason I did that is in the interim period while I was applying for doctoral programs, it's a tedious process, and I thought I can bide my time productively by continuing to study. So it really takes a lot of patience. I'm surprised that I survived. But it was very helpful to have the kind of support, like I said, from the academic community. Yes, please. And on that note, another insight. One of my colleagues in the doctoral program at MSU Mankato, he's from South Dakota, and he was complaining to me that he'd sent out 3 resumes to universities and he didn't get a single response. And we were very close friends. And I said, you know, perspective matters. I said, you've sent out 3 resumes, you're a little bit upset that nobody has contacted you. In the past month alone, I've sent out about 25 and nobody's responded. On the topic of rules changing and the costs of applications changing, the political, social, and economic climate also changes. You know, it's a pattern, it's an ebb and flow. So I was applying for a job at a time when it was not very, how should I put this politely? It was not conducive for international students to be in the job market. So I think my hit rate was probably 1 in 100, something like that. And I did apply to about 250 to 270 places, and I did get that break. So it is important to keep at it, really important to do that. Yeah. Another interesting thing, I talked about systems. I mean, every single one of us has an important role to play. When I'm hired, I create other opportunities for other people. Very often, people who are American citizens. And that's important to understand and recognize the interconnectedness of all our jobs, of all the opportunities that emerge from one person being employed. It's not only about me, it's about other opportunities that emerge that you might not have even imagined. Okay? And there is, in fact, research to show this. And in industries that rely a lot on people with H-1B visas or international work experience, the cycles of unemployment are less than in the industries that do not rely on diverse talent. I thought you'd be interested to see that insight. Any questions, any comments? Yes?
Quick question, Promeet. So for the businesses that are, struggling to find people to work for them and have not went into the realm of looking at international students, how should they approach an individual like yourself in those shoes, up against a deadline, up against stress?
Right.
And how does an employer find that person that actually fits if they're not networking and they're not
Such a good question, Sam. So the whole networking thing is very important. When I was looking for a job, it's a numbers game. I know that more applications are better. I also look at the number of employers who sponsor the maximum number of visas. And I see an IBM, which is, again, what Erin mentioned. I see IBM, I see Cognizant, I see Accenture, and I gravitate towards employers like that, and I might not see a smaller employer that does not show up on the radar, because I don't even know that that they're looking for people like me. So to keep yourself visible, it helps to connect with the academic community. Even if you have not hired an international person before, and truthfully, I'm not sure that my current employer, St. Paul College, hired many people before on an H-1B visa. They took a chance on me. And I'm so glad that they did. I'm very happy doing what I do. So it is true that this makes it complicated. There are laws in the US that prevent us from asking somebody, are you authorized to work in the US? So prospective employers politely find a way around that, and they say, will you now or in future require sponsorship to work in the US? And I believe that at the time that I was applying for jobs some years ago, that checking that box put my resume at the bottom of the stack. I believe that's what happened. but that's okay. It's important to just keep at it. Yes? And on that point, just to connect all the dots, Sam, you were asking how do employers find students who are international students. JC, I know that you won't remember me necessarily, but because you have so many international students. But I'll say this, that every time I needed a new I-20, our MSU Mankato International Student Office was so responsive. And it's not that they were not responsive to other students, but it's just that they knew that for an international student to be out of immigration status, it's a non-negotiable. And once that happens, you could potentially lose your visa, you could potentially be sent back. You know, so I appreciate that about all the academic institutions I've worked for. It'll take some time for the workforce to understand those deadlines as well, and those hard stops. On the topic of deadlines, I'd like to leave now because I have to drive back to St. Paul and teach a class. Okay. So thanks, I really enjoyed this interaction. If you do have any questions, you know, Garrett and Sam have my email ID. I'd be happy to talk to you at any time. Thank you.